Hi guys, Henry again from FineLimeGames, and today we're going to be going over the Snake archetype. It's the second video in our series of archetypes for the game after Sharks. If you haven't seen that video already, go ahead and check that out. Sharks are the biggest archetype, and Snakes are probably the second biggest. So they have a lot of support in the two-player starter set and the core set 1. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start getting into the cards here. Starting off with the green snake. The green snake is the cheapest snake in the game, costing 5 food, forages for 3, and it's a rarity among snakes. Snakes tend not to forage for too much, but the green snake is a good forager for them. 4 health, 3 attack, 1 defense, 5 speed, very average stat line for something that costs 5. And when this animal is killed, you may search your deck for any snake and add it to your hand, then shuffle your deck. So, kind of some draw support to be able to find other snakes. They don't play quite as well off each other as sharks do, but they're more kind of, they like to play alone or to not as many combos between them. But this is a way to get the resources you're looking for, find the animals you need. Importantly, this animal does have to be killed, so it can't you can't just draw immediately. You have to play this in the front row or hope your opponent kills it, something like that. Next up, we have the corn snake. The corn snake's in the two-player starter set, so you guys probably seen this already. I'll just go over it quickly again. Costs 7, forages for 3 with 6 health, 4 attack, 1 defense, 4 speed, and then it gets 1 extra attack against rodents. So ordinarily it's fine against rodents. It's very good early game. It's the kind of the advantage of being slow. First of all, high speed is often an advantage of being slow. Puts you at risk of being killed before you can attack. But what it does do is if you survive before you're able to attack, then most faster things will be exhausted, and so your attacks are not going to be evaded very much. So being slow is normally a weakness, but in some cases, when you have enough health or defense to survive, being able to attack something that can't evade is very good. And so when you're looking at these cards, yes, the lower speeds can be a bit of a weakness, but on a corn snake, against most rodents, they're not going to be able to kill it one shot, and then it's going to be able to attack them when they can't evade. So, very good in that situation. Next up, we have the Garter Snake. This is a core set 1 card, so a new card, partially designed by Alex Tedrow, best Kingdom Animalia player in the world. Costs 8 food, forages for 3, so a bit expensive for a forager, but better than +2 like normal animals. And it has 6 health, 4 attack, 1 defense, and a speed of 5, and an interesting kind of swarm the field ability. When this animal is played into your side of the field, you may pay 7 food, so 1 less than it normally costs. If you do, you may search your deck for a Garter Snake and place it adjacent to this snake. Shuffle your deck afterward. So, a couple ways you can use this. One, if you are lacking foragers, 8 and 7 food is a bit much to pay for something that forages for 3. But if you don't have anything else in your hand and you really need foragers and you got the food for it, you can just pull out 2 Garter Snakes immediately, as long as they're not in your discard pile. They have to be placed adjacent to this snake. So if this is in the back row, the other Garter Snakes have to go to the back row, and if it's in the front row, they have to go to the front row. But it's a good way to get extra cards on the field if you have the food for it. Next we have the Coral Snake. This is the last one that costs less than 10, so a decent amount of low-cost options for the snakes. Costs 9 food with a forage of 2, 6 health, 4 attack, 1 defense, 5 speed, which, if you're seeing a pattern start to emerge here, that's the kind of the normal stat line for a small snake. When this animal deals damage, place 1 poison counter on the defender, then roll 1d20. On a roll of 11 or higher, place an additional poison counter on the defender. So the ability to drop 2 poisons for something that costs 9 is very, very good. If you were to roll perfectly and get that second poison counter and roll 4s on both of them, this animal could be doing 12 damage for something that costs 9, which is very, very strong. We'll get into something a little bit later, but this is very good in a case where a lot of snakes want to be placing poison. There's a lot of cards that interact with poison, and this is a good way to get poison on for cheap. Next up, another one you guys have already seen, Indigo Snake. A very standard, pretty well statted snake, just kind of a baseline, good body to get out for pretty cheap. Costs 11 food with 10 health, 6 attack, 1 defense, and 5 speed. So like I said, good stats across the board. If this animal deals damage to an enemy with 6 or less max health, place a stun counter on them. If they are already exhausted, deal 1 extra damage. Just a refresher on stuns. When a stun counter is placed, if the defender is not exhausted, the stun immediately exhausts them and then the counter goes away. If they are already exhausted when the stun counter is placed, at the end of the status phase, when animals normally ready for the next turn, they unexhaust themselves. Remove the stun counter instead and don't unexhaust the animal. Unfortunately for the Indigo Snake, it can't do that because if the enemy it attacks is already exhausted, it just deals 1 extra damage, but that can be good in and of itself. But if it attacks something that has not activated yet and places the stun, it immediately exhausts it. Next up, we have the Copperhead, one of my favorite go-tos when playing snakes. A bit more expensive than Indigo Snake. Costs 13 food with 9 health, 6 attack, 1 defense, and 4 speed. The big thing there is that 14 plus evasion. That's a pretty good chance to evade, especially most of these snakes don't have very good chances to evade, and so a 14 plus is very good. And if the current biome is a grassland or forest, that evasion chance is increased by 2, meaning it has a 12 plus chance to evade. So 45% on what's really an attacker is pretty good. When this animal deals damage, place 1 poison counter on the enemy. That's standard for quite a few snakes. Most snakes in the world either use some sort of venom or they use some sort of constriction ability. A lot of the ones in the game thus far are ones that use venom, so they're placing poison counters. Copperhead's no different. For 13 food, you really want it to be able to evade once, because you're kind of paying for that higher evasion. But it's still decently low cost and a pretty effective, early to mid game attacker. Next up, we have the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake. This was a 2-player starter set card, so you guys have already seen this. But it is very, very good. It is one of the most annoying animals to deal with when your opponent has it. 14 food for 10 health, 7 attack, 1 defense, 4 speed. So like a lot of these snakes, it's pretty slow. But that's a decent body on it, and the ability is where it really shines. When this animal is attacked, deal 3 damage to the attacker. When this animal deals damage, roll d20. On a 12 or higher, place 1 poison counter on the enemy. So I went over this in this 2-player starter set video, but I just want to go over it again here. It's when this animal deals damage, and that little counter attack of 3 damage, that's the animal dealing damage. So you can roll for poison on the Diamondback Rattlesnake's normal attack, and on that little counter attack it does. And that counter attack happens even if this animal is killed. You still deal the 3 damage and roll for poison. So this makes a fantastic wall on the front. As long as you're not up against stuff that's just going to one-shot it and shrug off the damage, kind of mid-game, when you want to be able to work on your economy and you don't care too much about attacking with something big, just put a Western Diamondback Rattlesnake in the front and it will be a really annoying wall for your opponent to deal with. Next we have the Gaboon Viper, jumping up in price a little bit to 17. Has 11 health, 7 attack, 1 defense, and 4 speed. You might say that's a kind of weak stat line for something that costs 17, especially that 7 attack. Well, it's going to have the ability. When this animal deals damage, place a poison counter on the defender, very standard. When this animal attacks, roll d20. On a 15 or higher, double this animal's attack and place 2 poison counters on the defender. Now, you're only working with about a 30% chance. Am I correct in saying that? 30% or 25%? Pardon my bad math. But you're jumping from 7 and 1 poison counter to 14 and 2 poison counters for something that costs 17. That's very strong. It's basically like the Gaboon Vipers has a chance to get a critical hit. And if it lands that critical hit, it does a ton of damage. Really, 14 attack plus 2 poison counters can be very, very strong for something that costs 17 food. So a bit of luck involved here, but if you're rolling well, that can be very, very strong. Hopping into the rares, this is one of my favorite cards in the whole game, the Inland Taipan. Costs 22 for 12 health, 6 attack, 1 defense, and 6 speed. A couple of things stand out there. A, not a lot of health or attack for something that costs 22, especially a rare. But 6 speed is one of the fastest snakes in the game to this point. And the ability on this thing is really what justifies the 22 food. This animal can attack 3 times per turn. When this animal deals damage, place 1 poison counter on the defender. So that's kind of where things balance out. This for 22 food, you're getting something that's very susceptible to being one shot, and it's probably not going to last much longer than 1 turn. But you also have the ability to deal 18 damage and 3 poison counters. And that can be you attack the same thing 3 times and deal a ton of damage to it, or you attack something twice and then something else once, or you attack 3 different things once. This animal is super, super, super oppressive if your opponent has something on low health in the front or doesn't have anything in the front, because it can pop whatever's in the front and then start killing back row. It can kill 3 things per turn, which can make this absolutely absurd. Really got to make sure that it's not taking too much damage, and you can't expect it to last too long. But if it gets to activate one time and start going ham on stuff with those 3 attacks, then this can really be oppressive. Next we have another rare. This is another new one from the core set, the green Anaconda. It's the biggest snake in the game, and it probably will forever be the biggest snake in the game. Costs 25 food for 20 health, 10 attack, 1 defense, 4 speed, and a pretty long ability. When this animal deals damage to an enemy, place a stun counter on the enemy. This animal can remain exhausted at the start of the management phase to deal 6 damage and place a stun counter on the animal that attacked the previous turn. This is a very unique ability, and it is something that you really gotta kind of plan around. So your green Anaconda, when it attacks something, it places that stun, and it's not like the Indigo Snake. It places the stun no matter what, and so your opponent either becomes exhausted immediately or stays exhausted the next turn. And you can just keep having the Anaconda stun that opponent over and over and deal 6 damage. Now, you are exhausting your green Anaconda every time, and so you might not want to do that because you have a 25 health. A animal that costs 25 food sitting there not doing a ton. But the ability to completely lock down an opposing animal cannot be overstated. If your opponent has a lion or a tiger or a great white shark or something really big that could really wreak havoc on your animals, if you can just choose to lock it down with your green Anaconda and not let it get a turn, that can be very strong. That can completely neuter your opponent's ability to attack. So the green Anaconda is not as much an attacker as it is more of a control tank kind of thing. You're going to want to lock down something and then have your 20 health keep you alive for a while you keep the opposing animal out of the fight. And lastly, you've all seen this in the 2-player starter set, the King Cobra, kind of the big boss, the main quintessential attacking snake. Costs 25 food for 16 health, 12 attack, 1 defense, 5 speed. It can target your opponent's back row with an attack of 6, and when it deals damage, place 2 poison counters on the defender. This thing can kill basically any forager in the game. The ability to deal a minimum of 8 damage with a maximum of 14 really can damage your opponent's economy. There's not a whole lot of run-of-the-mill foragers that are going to be able to stand up to that. Or alternatively, the ability to do up to 20 damage to something in the front is very strong too. The King Cobra loves poison support, which we'll get to in a little while here, and it's a card that is in most snake decks for the flexibility. Gonna want to make sure you have things to protect it though, or you play it at a good time, because it's not super tanky for something that costs 25. Getting into a few support cards here, we have Snakesense, which costs 2 food. It's a persistent adaptation for snakes only, and you may play this card during the management phase. At the end of the current set, discard this card. After you draw your new hand, search your deck for any snake and add it to your hand, shuffling your deck afterward. So this is kind of a running theme with this faction, reptiles and amphibians, of each faction kind of has its own identity. Maybe I'll do a breakdown of those in the future, but reptiles and amphibians, most of their stuff is slow, decently high defense, but doesn't normally hit for a ton outside of poison counters and stuff like that. They're more about planning and doing things in advance that will pay off later, and really being more cunning and strategic rather than just having strong, straight-up animals that win 1v1 fights. So Snakesense is a perfect example of that. You are doing something that has no immediate effect for the guaranteed effect of getting whatever snake you want next set. So obviously you don't want to play this set 5, but you are able to play this, set 1 or 2, or if you know you're going to lose a set, you play this so you can guarantee to get whatever snake you want to start a next set, which can be very good for consistency. Then we have Snakebite. This was in a 2-player starter set. It's very simple. It's a 3-cost instant. At the start of the combat phase, as long as you control a snake in the front row, you may deal 2 damage to any opposing animal in the front row. It's just like a little extra way to deal some damage if you already control a snake. It kind of gets around the snake's low speed if you can deal 2 damage instantly. Ordinarily, 2 damage is not a lot, but it ignores defense as all adaptations and effects do. And so when your opponent has something fast, maybe a cheetah or something that's already low on health, you can play this to kind of jump in there and kill it and save the snakes you have in the front. Lastly, we have Extra Poison. This is another one that was in the 2-player starter set. When one of your animals places a poison counter on the enemy, you may place an additional poison counter. So this is something that works great with snakes because snakes are the majority of the poison counters you're going to be placing offensively. There are some other cards, some frogs and other stuff that places poison defensively, but Extra Poison allows your King Cobra to place 3 poison counters, or your Coral Snake to place 3. And you can stack this. So I guess if you ran 3 copies of this, you could place 5 poison counters with your King Cobra or something like that. You are basically paying 3 food for the potential of doing 4 extra damage. And this combos really, really well with a card that I have yet to review. It is, if you guys remember the shark video, there's each faction got one rare adaptation in Core Set 1. That is a persistent adaptation that does effects based on how many times you do things, and it lasts between sets. There's one for reptiles, which I'll review at a later date, that works when you place poison counters. And this card combined with that is very, very, very strong. If the effects are happening because each time you play a poison counter, playing an extra one like this just gets you those effects that much faster. So I'll have to include, going over kind of the poison meta for reptiles and amphibians and all the support for that. I'll go over that at a later date. I just wanted to highlight this one here because it goes well with a bunch of snakes. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 snakes so far that place poison counters. Some of them multiple poison counters. So, but that's going to go ahead and wrap up the snake archetype overview. It's a very fun archetype to play. It doesn't combo with itself as much as the sharks do, but that's not really the faction's identity. Reptiles really aren't about too many of those direct combos. They're more about long-term plays, and the snakes are great for that. Poison in and of itself as a mechanic is a long-term play because you're waiting to deal quite a bit of damage for the status phase instead of having it built into your attack. It should be noted that a lot of these snakes and just poison in general is very good against high defense enemies because poison ignores defense. And so you could have something with a ton of defense, but if you put a poison counter on it, you're able to kind of circumvent that opposing animal's strength. Anyway, if you're interested in checking out any of these cards, feel free to play the game on Untap. All these cards are in the database. Go ahead and join the Discord and hit me up if you're looking to play a game. I'm always happy to answer questions and walk people through tutorials of how to do stuff and get some games in. Most of these cards are available actually all of these cards are in the 2-player starter set or the soon-to-be-released Core Set 1. Those are going to be released in booster packs. So go ahead and get your hands on some of those on the Game Crafter and check these cards out. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.